A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hi Herman and Corn. We did a really interesting episode before about persona non grata or PNG and the mechanics that actually goes on when a country declares an ambassador, or you mentioned pertinently the case of the Russian diplomats, where Russia had a lot of intelligence officers in different missions, and often as you mentioned, that wave of persona non grata was used in bulk and created an actually logistical challenge for Russia to have to repatriate a large number of its embassy workers / spies. I'd like to talk today about another slightly lesser form of diplomatic meltdown. So we saw yesterday that Spain has withdrawn its ambassador from its mission in Israel. And what I'd love to touch on is we've talked in the context of, everything in diplomacy. It's such a strange world from the outside, at least, that it's all about these. We talked about they have this many wonderful strange terms from French, like a démarche, and strange protocols. It's such a protocol-led field, but it's all about the signaling and the image as much as it is about the actual actions. But it's the actions that actually interest me in terms of what's signified. The question I have specifically, Herman and Corn, is this process of recalling an ambassador is a stage we see. It's a pattern we see when ties are degrading. And we have an interesting counterpoint in the European Union's most critical states towards Israel. You could probably highlight Ireland and Spain as being the two harshest voices in the EU bloc. And Israel closed its embassy in Dublin a couple of years ago. Before that, the then ambassador, who I believe went on to work in Spain, she must have someone at the foreign ministry who doesn't like her. She was recalled for what's called consultations. And again, you read these things in the news and you think to yourself, this doesn't sound like, it sounds like almost a made up thing. If you really wanted to talk with your ambassador in a country about the situation there, couldn't you do that over a secure teleconference? Like the idea that someone has to come back, you almost picture a kind of horse and carriage environment where a ambassador is being conveyed back grandly on a grand tour through Europe. And I think that's a lot of it comes from that actual history. But when we have an ambassador recalled, my question is how if we were to work in the Spanish embassy in Israel, tomorrow the ambassador is packing their bags. The embassy is down a staff member, but the chargé d'affaires takes up the slack. How significant of an impact on the functioning of the embassy would that have? And why do we see in the case of, if you look at Ireland, Ireland went straight from we're having consultations to we are closing the embassy. They didn't really spend much time on those kind of intermediate stages. And what I'd like to talk about, Herman and Corey, what I'd like to focus on is what these nuances actually represent in terms of slightly different policy changes. Because we see in Israel, we talk about reciprocity in diplomacy a lot as well. Israel's mission in Spain is currently being led by a chargé, apparently. So Israel did it. Spain apparently waited for some point where their outrage reached some kind of a peak. I think they're tying it to the current war against Iran, and now they're on an equal footing. So what do you make, Herman and Corn, of the calibration of these moves here? What would lead the Spanish to conclude that rather than closing the embassy, they're going to just recall their ambassador. What would happen if they had decided to close entirely, serve it from a non-resident ambassador? There's lots of ways in which we see it done, but what is the signal in all this subtlety? Herman and Corn, over to you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Korn, and I've been thinking a lot lately about how we talk about international relations. Usually, when people hear that two countries are having a spat, they think of it as a binary choice. Either you are friends or you have cut off all ties. But diplomacy is rarely that simple. It is more like a dimmer switch than an on-off button. You can turn the lights down so low that you are stumbling over the furniture, but you have not necessarily cut the power to the building.
That is exactly right. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I love that analogy, Korn. Diplomacy is all about calibration. It is the art of the measured response. You want to show your displeasure. You want to signal to your domestic voters and the international community that a line has been crossed, but you do not want to completely blind yourself to what is happening on the ground. Our housemate Daniel sent us a fascinating prompt today about this very thing. He wanted us to look at the mechanics behind Spain's recent move to recall its ambassador from Israel, and what it actually means when a mission is downgraded to being run by a chargé d'affaires.
Right. And it is a perfectly timed question because it feels like a masterclass in what I call the diplomatic dance. We have talked about the physical side of this before, back in episode 1126, where we looked at embassy security and how urban landscapes are transformed into these fortresses. But today is more about the political fortress. It is about the invisible walls that go up when the highest-ranking official leaves the room. It is a move that happens in the shadows of protocol, but the ripples it sends through a bilateral relationship are massive.
It is a significant move, and I think people often confuse it with something much more extreme, like a total severance of ties or the expulsion of diplomats. When a country declares someone persona non grata, which we covered in episode 1060, that is a forced exit. That is a hostile act where you are essentially kicking someone out of your house and slamming the door. What Spain did here is a voluntary recall for consultations, which then transitioned into leaving the embassy in the hands of a chargé d'affaires ad interim. It is the difference between being evicted and choosing to go stay at a hotel for a while to make a point.
So let us start with the basics for everyone listening. What is a chargé d'affaires? It sounds very fancy and very French, but functionally, how does it differ from an ambassador? Is it just a title change, or is there a real shift in the gears of the machine?
It is French for person in charge of affairs. In the hierarchy of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, which is basically the universal rulebook for how countries play nice, there are three distinct classes of heads of mission. The first and highest is an ambassador or a nuncio, who is accredited to the head of state. The second is an envoy or minister, though you do not see those much anymore in modern practice. The third class is the chargé d'affaires.
And the big distinction there is who they are talking to, right? An ambassador is the personal representative of one head of state to another. If an ambassador is in Israel, they represent the King of Spain to the President of Israel. They are the direct line between the two highest points of authority.
They carry a letter of credence. It is a physical, formal document signed by their head of state. When they arrive, there is a whole ceremony. They go to the presidential residence, they present their credentials, and they are officially recognized as the voice of their nation at the highest level. A chargé d'affaires does not have that. They are accredited to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, not the head of state. It is a lower level of bureaucratic recognition. They carry a letter of introduction from their own foreign minister to the host's foreign minister. It is the difference between a CEO to CEO meeting and a regional manager talking to a department head.
So, when Spain pulls the ambassador and leaves the chargé in charge, they are essentially saying, we are still talking to your government, but we are no longer talking head to head. We have moved from the executive suite down to the management office. But Herman, does that actually change the day-to-day work? If I'm a diplomat at the embassy, am I still typing the same reports?
You are typing the reports, but who is reading them and who is talking to you changes completely. Functionally, the difference is massive. People think, oh, the embassy is still open, the lights are on, so what is the big deal? But the big deal is access. In the world of diplomacy, access is the only currency that matters. An ambassador can pick up the phone and potentially get a meeting with a cabinet minister or even the prime minister. They have the rank to demand that kind of FaceTime. A chargé d'affaires? They are lucky if they get a meeting with a deputy assistant secretary. They are effectively blocked from the rooms where the real decisions are being made.
I imagine that creates a real administrative bottleneck. If you are a Spanish citizen in Israel or an Israeli business trying to coordinate a major project with Spain, and the mission is downgraded, does the actual work slow down, or is it just the fancy dinners that stop happening? Because those dinners are often where the work gets done, right?
Oh, it definitely slows down. Think about treaty negotiations or high-level policy coordination. If there is a major security concern or a shift in trade policy, those things usually require a signature or a formal agreement that only someone with full plenipotentiary powers, like an ambassador, can facilitate with authority. When you have a chargé, everything has to be kicked back to the home capital for even minor decisions because the person on the ground lacks the formal mandate to speak for the head of state. You lose the ability to be agile. You are essentially putting your relationship into a slow motion mode.
It sounds like a deliberate throttling of the relationship. It is not just a protest. It is a functional degradation of the bilateral link. We talked about boutique diplomacy in episode 452, where countries use smaller, focused missions to get things done. But this is the opposite. This is taking a full-service embassy and intentionally making it less efficient. It is like trying to run a high-speed internet connection through a dial-up modem. You can still get the data, but it is going to take forever, and the connection might drop at any moment.
It is. And it is a very specific type of signal. You choose the recall of an ambassador when you want to express extreme displeasure, but you are not ready to go to the nuclear option of closing the embassy. Closing an embassy is a disaster for any country. If Spain closed its embassy in Tel Aviv, they would lose their eyes and ears on the ground. They would lose their intelligence gathering capabilities. They would lose the ability to provide consular services to their own citizens. Imagine being a Spanish tourist who loses their passport and finding out there is no embassy to go to because your government wanted to make a political point. That is a political nightmare for the home government.
Right, that would be a massive failure of the state's primary duty to protect its citizens. So, the recall is the middle ground. It keeps the lights on, it keeps the intelligence flowing, it keeps the passport office open, but it sends a very public message of condemnation. It is a way of saying, we are watching you, and we do not like what we see, but we are not quite ready to stop looking entirely.
And it is a message intended for two different audiences. There is the international audience where Spain is signaling to the European Union and the United Nations that they are taking a hard line. They are positioning themselves as a moral leader or a principled actor on the world stage. But there is also a domestic audience. Often, these moves are about internal politics. If a government is facing pressure from its own base to take a stand on a conflict, recalling an ambassador is a high-profile move that looks tough on the evening news, but does not actually cost the government much in terms of real-world functionality in the short term. It is a low-stakes way to look high-principled.
That is an interesting point. It is almost performative. But is it effective? Does Israel, in this case, actually care? Or do they just see it as a temporary tantrum? Because if I am the host country and you pull your ambassador, I might just think, fine, less work for my protocol office.
Well, the Israeli perspective is usually one of reciprocity. If you look at how the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs handles these things, they often respond in kind, or they use it as a moment to clarify their own red lines. From a pro-Israel perspective, you could argue that Spain is actually hurting its own ability to influence the situation. If you do not have an ambassador with access to the top levels of the Israeli government, how are you supposed to advocate for your interests or try to mediate? You have basically benched your star player and then complained that you are not winning the game. You have removed your most effective tool of persuasion at the exact moment you claim you want to change the other side's behavior.
It reminds me of the split footprint we discussed in episode 5-on-1 regarding the U.S. presence in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Diplomacy is so much about being in the room where it happens. If you intentionally remove yourself from that room, you are essentially ceding the field to other actors who are willing to keep their ambassadors in place. you are leaving a vacuum. And in the Middle East, vacuums are never empty for long.
And there is a historical context here that is worth noting. If you look back at the 1979 Iran hostage crisis, that was a total breakdown where the embassy was seized and relations were severed. That is the extreme. But in modern European diplomacy, especially within the EU, we see this recall tactic used more frequently. It is a way to signal moral high ground without having to deal with the economic fallout of cutting trade ties. Spain and Israel still have significant trade. They still have security cooperation on some levels. They are not going to throw that away over a political disagreement, so they use the ambassador as a sacrificial lamb. It is a symbolic sacrifice to preserve the material relationship.
I want to dig deeper into the actual title of chargé d'affaires ad interim. Does the ad interim part imply that it is always meant to be temporary? Like, is there a clock ticking the moment the ambassador leaves? Or can an embassy run like this for years?
In theory, yes, it is temporary. Ad interim means for the time being. It implies that the post of ambassador is vacant and will eventually be filled. There is another version called a chargé d'affaires en pied, who is permanently appointed as the head of the mission at that lower rank. But that is very rare today and usually only happens between countries that do not have full diplomatic recognition of each other. By using the ad interim status, Spain is keeping the door open. They are saying, we can fix this. All we have to do is send someone back with a new letter of credence. It is a placeholder.
So it is reversible. That is the key difference from a total break in relations. If you break relations, you have to go through a massive multi-year process to re-establish them. You have to negotiate new treaties, find new buildings, revet all your staff. With a recall, you just book a flight for the ambassador. It is like hitting the pause button on a relationship rather than deleting the contact from your phone.
Precisely. But while it is on pause, the relationship undergoes a sort of atrophy. The personal ties between the ambassador and the host country's officials start to wither. The informal channels, the dinner parties, the quiet conversations over coffee, those are where the real diplomacy happens. A chargé d'affaires is rarely invited to those intimate settings. They are not part of the inner circle. So while the formal link is just paused, the informal link, which is often more important, is actually dying.
That makes me think about the role of the ambassador in the 21st century. We live in a world of instant communication. The Spanish Prime Minister can call the Israeli Prime Minister on a secure line in seconds. Does the physical presence of an ambassador even matter anymore? If we can do everything via Zoom or WhatsApp, why do we care if there is a guy with a letter of credence in Tel Aviv? Is the ambassador just a relic of the age of sailing ships?
That is the million-dollar question, Corn. And honestly, some people argue that the role is becoming obsolete, but I disagree. There is a nuance to in-person, on-the-ground presence that technology cannot replace. An ambassador is a censor. They are picking up the mood in the capital. They are talking to journalists. They are meeting with opposition leaders. They are seeing things that do not make it into the official cables. They can read the room in a way that a camera cannot. When you recall that person, you are essentially cutting off your most sensitive nerve endings in that country.
It is about the subtext. When we talk about the intended message behind this maneuver, the subtext is that Spain is willing to lower the quality of its information and its influence to make a point. It is a strategic choice to be less informed and less involved. It is a form of self-sabotage used as a weapon.
And it also puts the burden on the host country. By recalling the ambassador, Spain is saying, the ball is in your court to change your behavior so that we feel comfortable sending our representative back. It is a way of demanding a concession without actually having to negotiate for one. But the risk is that the host country just says, okay, fine, stay home. We will talk to the other 20 countries that still have ambassadors here. If you are not a superpower, your absence might not be as painful as you think it is.
It seems like a very risky move for a country like Spain that wants to be a major player in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern politics. If you look at episode 861, where we modeled Israel's strategic pivot in 26, we saw how Israel is increasingly looking toward new partners if the old ones become too difficult to work with. If Spain steps back, does that just create a vacuum for someone else to fill? Does it just push Israel further toward partners who do not care about the issues Spain is protesting?
It absolutely does. Diplomacy is a zero-sum game when it comes to influence. If one country's influence drops, another's will rise to fill that space. And when you are talking about a region as volatile as this, that vacuum is usually filled by actors who might not have Spain's or the EU's interests at heart. You might find that when you are ready to send your ambassador back, your old seat at the table has been taken by someone else.
So let us talk about the thawing process. If Spain decides next month that they have made their point and they want to send the ambassador back, how does that look? Do they just show up at the airport and say, "Hey, I am back. Where's my car?"
No, it is actually quite complicated. You have to go through the process of agrément again. That is another French term meaning agreement. Before a country sends a new ambassador, they have to ask the host country for permission. They send a name, and the host country has to say yes. If the relationship is still tense, the host country can just sit on that request for months. They can effectively block the return of an ambassador without ever saying no. They just never say yes. It is a silent veto.
Wow, so by withdrawing their ambassador, Spain has actually given Israel a veto over when the relationship returns to normal. That seems like a massive strategic blunder if you are the one trying to exert pressure. You have given up your leverage and handed your opponent the keys to the door.
It can be. It is a gamble. You are betting that the host country will want you back enough to play ball. But if the host country feels insulted, they can make the return process very long and very embarrassing. They can demand apologies, or they can just ignore the request for agreement entirely, leaving the mission in that downgraded state indefinitely. This is why these moves are often debated so fiercely within foreign ministries. The career diplomats usually hate them because they know how hard it is to undo the damage.
This is why I love these deep dives into the mechanics. On the surface, it is a headline, "Spain recalls ambassador." It sounds simple. It sounds like a clean moral act. But when you look at the Vienna Convention, the protocol of credentials, the administrative bottlenecks, and the loss of high-level access, you realize it is a move that has huge second-order effects. It is a move that can haunt a foreign policy for a decade.
It really does. And for our listeners who want to track this, the thing to watch for isn't just the news of the ambassador returning. It is the level of meetings the chargé d'affaires is getting. If you see the Spanish chargé meeting with the Israeli foreign minister, that is a sign that things are warming up even before an ambassador is officially reappointed. If they are only meeting with mid-level bureaucrats, the relationship is still in the deep freeze. The rank of the person across the table tells you more than the press release ever will.
That is a great practical takeaway. It is about watching the level of the person on the other side of the table. If you are interested in the more extreme side of this, definitely check out episode 1060 on persona non grata. It is a completely different vibe when someone is kicked out versus when they are called home. One is a breakup, the other is a trial separation.
And if you want to understand the physical reality of these places, episode 1126 on fortress diplomacy is essential. It helps you visualize why these buildings are so important, even when the person at the top of the masthead is missing. The building itself is a sovereign island, and even without an ambassador, that island remains a vital piece of the geopolitical puzzle.
So, thinking about the future, Herman, do you think we will see more of this? As the world becomes more polarized and domestic audiences become more vocal, does the recall become the go-to move for every mid-sized power that wants to look important on the world stage? Is this the future of diplomacy, a series of performative recalls?
I think so. It is a low-cost way to signal virtue to a domestic audience. In an era of social media diplomacy, where a tweet can cause a crisis, the ambassador becomes a very visible and easily movable pawn. We might be entering an era of the permanent chargé d'affaires, where missions are kept in a state of perpetual downgrade, because no one wants to take the political risk of sending a full ambassador and being seen as too friendly to a controversial regime. We are seeing it already in several spots around the globe.
That would be a fascinating and somewhat depressing shift. It would mean our global diplomatic infrastructure is becoming permanently throttled. We would be living in a world of management-level communication instead of leadership-level communication. We would be trying to solve world-ending problems through the equivalent of a customer service chat box.
And that makes it much harder to solve the big problems. You cannot solve a regional conflict or a global trade war if the people in the room do not have the authority to make a deal. We are trading long-term influence for short-term political points. It is a trend that makes the world a much more dangerous and less predictable place.
Well, on that cheerful note, I think we have given people a lot to chew on. This stuff is so much more than just titles and ceremonies. It is about how the world actually functions behind the scenes. It is about the friction that keeps the wheels of history from turning too fast, or sometimes from turning at all.
It really is. And I want to thank Daniel for sending this one in. It is one of those topics that seems dry on the surface, just a bunch of guys in suits arguing over titles. But it is absolutely full of these hidden rules and strategic traps that determine the fate of nations.
Definitely. And hey, if you are enjoying these deep dives into the weird mechanics of our world, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and helps us keep doing this. We are a small operation, and your support is our letter of credence.
Yeah, we see all the feedback, and it really makes a difference. You can find all our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today, at myweirdprompts.com. We have a full RSS feed there, and you can search the archive for anything we have covered over the last 1100 plus episodes. We have got everything from the history of salt to the future of orbital debris.
And if you want to be the first to know when a new episode drops, search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram and join our channel there. It is the fastest way to stay in the loop, and sometimes we post extra bits of research that didn't make it into the final cut.
Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Herman Poppleberry.
And I am Corn. We will talk to you next time.
See you then.
So, I was thinking, Herman, if we were ambassadors, who would be the one getting recalled first?
Oh, definitely you, Corn. You would probably fall asleep during a state dinner and cause an international incident by snoring through the national anthem.
Fair point. But at least I would be well rested for the consultations back home. And I think my snoring has a certain rhythmic, diplomatic quality to it.
That is true. A sloth in a suit is still a sloth, even if he has plenipotentiary powers.
And a donkey in a suit is still a donkey, my friend. I have seen your office. It is a diplomatic disaster zone.
Touché. Let us get out of here before we start a civil war in the kitchen.
Wait, I actually wanted to ask you one more thing about the chargé d'affaires role. Is there any situation where a chargé actually has more power than an ambassador? Like, a specific edge case where being the number 2 is actually better?
That is an interesting thought. Maybe not more formal power, but sometimes they have more operational freedom. An ambassador is under a microscope. Every word they say is parsed by the host government and their home capital. A chargé can sometimes fly under the radar. They can have meetings with people, opposition leaders, activists, or even certain intelligence assets that an ambassador might be forbidden from seeing because it would be too much of a formal statement.
Ah, so it is the power of being less important. You can sneak into the back door while everyone is watching the front gate. You are the diplomatic equivalent of a stealth fighter.
In some very specific intelligence gathering scenarios, being a lower ranked official is actually an advantage. You are less of a target and more of a fly on the wall. People talk more freely when they do not think they are talking to the king's personal representative.
I love that. The secret power of the number 2. Maybe Spain knows exactly what it is doing after all. Maybe they are just clearing the way for some serious back-channel work.
Maybe, but I think they would still rather have the front door key. The back door is great for secrets, but the front door is where you get the signatures.
Probably. All right, for real this time. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye now.
Actually, one more thing. Do you think the word chargé is used enough in everyday life? I feel like we could use it for more things. Like, I am the chargé d'affaires of the kitchen today. It makes doing the dishes sound so much more noble.
Please don't. That just sounds like an excuse for why the dishes aren't done. You are not a diplomat, you are just lazy.
My credentials haven't been accepted by the dishwasher yet. It is a protocol issue. I am waiting for a letter of introduction from the sponge.
You are impossible. Let's go.
Going, gone. myweirdprompts.com, people. Check it out.
We're done, Corn.
Right, done.
Seriously.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Quack. Stop.
I'm stopping.
Good.
But did you know that the word nuncio comes from the Latin for messenger, and they used to be the only ones allowed to wear certain shades of purple?
No.
Okay, fine. Next time.
See you next time, everyone.
Peace.
And love.
And diplomacy.
And a sloths.
And donkeys.
We are leaving now.
We are. Truly.
Goodbye.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts.